Welcome to today's webinar, Financing Sustainable Agriculture in India, hosted by CFA Society India. I would like to take a moment to welcome our audience from around the world joining us today. I am Sivanand Ramachandran, CFA, Director of Capital Markets Policy, India at the CFA Institute, and I will present findings from the report on financing sustainable agriculture in India. After that, I will pass it to Sandeep Bhattacharya of Climate Bonds Initiative and my co-author of the report, who will moderate a panel discussion and take audience questions. Before I start, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes, including Q&A. We'll be leaving time for Q&A after the presentation and panel discussion. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the discussion. We'll take up questions in between sessions. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your viewer and typing your questions in the box. The report link will be shared on the chat box. We value your feedback, and so please complete your evaluation surveys before you sign off today. So let me share my presentation. Just a moment. So this report, Financing Sustainable Agriculture in India, is a joint report with Climate Bonds Initiative. So as background, CFA Institute and CBI started talking about a research partnership last year. We met with a cross-section of stakeholders. We did secondary research, and we are grateful for the contribution from different contributors who contributed case studies for this report, including Symbiotics, the NBFC, Samannati and Ananya Finance, and Rabo Foundation and USAID. So everything that you see today is a culmination of our efforts in this area. Now, there have been work by other organizations on financing sustainable agriculture in India, mainly by multilateral institutions and nonprofits. But as an investor association, we felt that we can bring a unique perspective for this topic. So in terms of content, so there'll be three parts to it. One is setting the stage. The second part is we'll be looking at different financing models that we have looked at. And finally, we'll conclude with our report recommendation or call to action. Setting the stage, right? So why are we interested in this particular topic and what are we trying to achieve? So in terms of context, the planet is already warming. So this is not, climate change is not something that is happening over the next 30 years. It's to some extent, it's already happening, although some of the scenarios look worse. Human activities have already caused planet to warm by 1 degree centigrade above pre-industrial levels. That's the reference point. Warming is set to exceed 1.5 degree during the 21st century in most of the scenarios. And even at 1.5 degrees, our planet makes experience frequent and heavy precipitation. So the first context is global warming is not a future thing, it's already happening. The second thing we want to highlight is agriculture contributes significantly to climate change, and climate change negatively affects agriculture. So agriculture, forestry, and land use sector that follow. contributes 21% of global greenhouse gas emissions, second only to energy production sector, right? So the sources of this greenhouse gas emissions are multifold. It could be deforestation, it could be methane emissions from rice cultivation as well as livestock, or it could be excessive use of fossil fuel based inputs, whether it's fertilizers or other chemicals. Interestingly, just over the course of this, I discovered a little tidbit, right? So it's not that rice requires standing water. It's just that rice can tolerate standing water, whereas weeds cannot, right? So if you flood your farms with water, so then you don't have to spend as much on weedicides, which is why it's typically rice cultivation happens on standing water. So what it does is bacteria, in anaerobic condition produces methane, right? So that's the side effect, not to mention the excess water usage for rice cultivation, right? So I think there is a lot of science behind the climate change for agriculture. And it's important that you recognize and we also move the farm practices towards sustainable agriculture. And the second part is, of course, if no adaptation were followed, climate change is expected to reduce yields. The other interesting bit is climate change also affects nutritional content of grains, right? So whether it's grain protein or even micronutrients, so these are impacted by climate change. The last context before we get into the financing models is that financing of climate resilience projects, including in agriculture, has lagged that of climate mitigation projects by a wide margin, right? So most of the projects in agriculture or resilient projects or adaptation projects in nature, and most of the time money goes for mitigation projects, whether it's renewable energy or green transportation. All of these are mitigation projects. Just for background, the climate finance provided or mobilized in industrial countries for climate action in emerging countries was 80 billion in 2019, according to OECD. And 63% of this, climate finance went to climate mitigation. There is just a quarter goes to, aimed at projects aimed at climate resilience. I just want to complete this section with what are the facets of climate resilient agriculture. Now, climate resilient agriculture is more than organic farming, right? So organic farming is a main component of climate resilient agriculture. Organic farming goes by many names. The most popular natural farming is the community-based natural farming, or CBNF, institutionalized by the state of Andhra Pradesh and spread to other states. One of the questions we get asked is, what about yields impact of organic farming? The best evidence, and we quote a lot of meta studies in the paper, the best evidence indicates that the yields from organic farmings are lower than conventional methods in the short to medium term, but they may be similar or better over the long term. I say maybe because we haven't done a lot of long horizon studies on the impact of organic farming, but the available evidence indicate that over the long term, and the most long-term studies are 30 years in nature, it says that the yields might be better. But the more important thing about organic farming is that there is a cost element to it. At the end of the day, fertilizers and other chemicals need to be paid either by the farmer or by the government through subsidies, right? So that's one impact. Not to mention the the impact of those usage, right, on soil health, biodiversity, and so on. So organic farming is probably the only way to do it. So it's not a question of whether the yield impact justifies or not, right? So if you put together all the elements to it, so that answers that question. Lastly, there are other elements to it, like infrastructure and technologies form the backbone of climate resilience. For example, elevated platforms that house photovoltaic panels. I wanted to show a picture, but anyway, so essentially there is a you put the photovoltaic panels right on top of your farmland. So what it does is it not only generates solar power, but some crops fare better in shade. So it also facilitates better yields in those crops like banana, tomato, or cotton. So it's so bottom line is there are many elements to climate resilient agriculture. I only picked out a couple of them. So there are other facets that we discuss in the report. Now, before I get into the models, I want to finish up with the challenges in scaling up financing climate resilient projects. We have already said that the financing is mostly going to mitigation. There are good reasons for it, right? The first reason is low transaction sizes. It is very difficult to put large amounts of capital to work in climate resilient projects. So we have talked about some of the transaction sizes. Globally, the transaction sizes are $25 million or less for a blended finance project aimed at sustainable agriculture. In India, those figures could be even smaller because of small land holdings. So low transaction sizes are typically not at the scale where you can start making meaningful contribution because sizes are small. There are also potentially lack of frameworks from the financial institution side. So historically, it's the grants and the subsidies and the multilateral institutions doing some of the work, and they are not potentially you don't have a lot of financial assessments going into those kind of financing, and mainstream financial institutions typically lack development frameworks to assess the impact of sustainable agriculture projects. So it has been kind of both ways. So that's the other challenge. And I'll just focus on the one part, which is uncertainty around long gestation periods. So climate resilient agriculture projects are typically long-term in nature. Especially whether if you get into agroforestry and those kind of areas. If you have long horizon projects which could be potentially risky for mainstream institutions, so it creates a lot of uncertainty. An analogy is infrastructure projects, which are also long-term in nature, but the lenders have means to mitigate the risks. So they can potentially have access to the future cash flows from that project, or they can use they have lien on the assets and so on. In agriculture, these kind of safeguards are typically difficult to achieve. You can't potentially collateralize assets in climate agriculture projects because the farmland potentially belongs to the farmer, and cash flows are difficult to kind of collateralize and so on. So it's like infrastructure, but the safeguards are not exactly the same when it comes to mitigating those long-term uncertainties. So these are some of the challenges, and it doesn't mean that things are not happening, which is what we'll see in the next section. Financing models. So we talk about 3 financing models in sustainable agriculture projects. Sorry. The models we analyzed were blended finance mechanisms, green bonds, and venture funding in agtechs. Now, these models are not mutually these models are not how do you put it? These are complementary. So typically, sometimes they are used in combination and not like a standalone mechanism. But these are potentially how we viewed the models which are available for financing sustainable agriculture. Now, one thing to note is the risk return profile of various climate financing models. You can put them on a different spectrum, right? So on the one end, you have this venture capital which has a potentially high expected returns and high risk. On the other end, you have green bonds, which at least we know that because of the demand, there is a greenium, or there is a green premium associated with those pricing. So that could be potentially at the other end of the spectrum. So those are different. That's how you can view the different models. We also have this thing like the blue oval. It's called blended finance. It's essentially through financial engineering, you can shift the risk return profiles of some of these instruments. So, you can reduce the risk of loans with a guarantee or other credit enhancement mechanism, or you can potentially supplement venture capital with grants, and you can reduce the risks for venture capital, right? So there are different ways of managing that risk when it comes to financing models. So very briefly, blended finance is defined as strategic use of development finance for mobilization of additional finance. What does it mean? So blended finance, which is a variety of instruments, like I said, guarantees, credit enhancement mechanism, insurance, and so on. So they change the risk return profile to make it more appealing to mainstream investors. But that's not the main purpose. The main purpose is more a catalytic effect. So when you use blended finance and you make the, and you start funding these projects, mainstream investors, gain more comfort about that financing model. They become better at assessing those models, and then the market matures over time. So the success of blended finance can be seen as get to a place where you don't need to use blended finance and those projects are commercially viable on their own. So that's the catalytic effect of blended finance, and that's what is the most exciting part of it. And typically blending public sources works best when the perceived risk in market are higher than actual risk because of lack of frameworks to assess, right, in the case of sustainable agriculture. The next model which we looked at in the paper is green, social, and sustainable bonds. So green bonds, I think people are mostly familiar with. Their use of proceeds is earmarked for green projects. Social bonds can also be useful for a market like India because of development aspects. If you see the cumulative issuance of green bonds, a lot of it goes towards energy, transportation, those kind of sectors, and barely about 4% is towards land use, which is where some of the agriculture projects will lie. So in every instrument that you see, that most of the funding goes towards energy and those climate mitigation projects, and that is something that needs to change if we have to tackle climate change. And lastly, last model we looked at is the venture capital funding in agtech. So a lot of innovations are happening in sustainable agriculture space, and some of these innovations need high risk capital, and that's where VC funds are most suitable, right? So essentially, remote sensing for looking at soil health and things like that. So there are some of these technologies are experimental, and venture capital is suited for it. We look at, so this model is just used by Velgro for dispensing grant and equity. So what you see is that in this kind of venture funding also, at the initial stages, ideation, concepting, those kind of stages, it can the project's viability can be improved by use of grants, right? So blending is not just limited to debt. It can also be used in conjunction with equity, right? So it can, at the end of the day, the idea is to improve the risk return profile. So those are the models. We are kind of coming towards the end of the report highlights. I'll conclude with the call to action, the kind of recommendations we have put forth in the report. Sandeep can get into the discussion with the panelists and talk about some of the nuances, the market practices, and even what is practically happening in India, right? So our recommendation from this report is we have at least fourfold recommendations. The first one is to develop a taxonomy for sustainable agriculture. So one thing about sustainable, we talked about organic farming, and there are many names to it. There are also multitude of practices. Therefore, it is useful to kind of define what the sustainable agriculture means. What practices will they mean, right? So, for example, growing of some crops like millet and so on, they use less water, right? So will the cultivation of those crops itself, would it constitute sustainable agriculture? I don't know, but it is useful to define what it means. without that, it's difficult to kind of start providing, supportive regulations, or even for, mainstream institutions to start, providing financing targeted at those activities, right? So it is similar to the EU taxonomy on sustainable activities, the means, which and other taxonomies which are developed. We think a taxonomy for sustainable agriculture is overdue. Like the other recommendations that we have done is address training and capacity needs. Training and capacity needs is not just for farmers, it is also for stakeholders like financial institutions, right? So even the workforce of financial institutions on how to conduct due diligence on sustainable agriculture projects. So it's not just teaching farmers how to farm sustainably. It's also for institutions to finance and how to make assessments on those social outcomes. And we do think that state government should support, in many ways. They are already doing so, but we think that research on organic farming and sustainable projects, especially long horizon studies, like I mentioned, that long horizon studies on organic farming are few and far between. We think that state governments have a role in supporting basic research. And lastly, mainstream institutions can also leverage data and technology to increase formalization. So, one of the issues is it's not like farmers, small farmers struggle to get loans for sustainable agriculture. They probably struggle to get loans for any kind of farming, right? So, they are not connected to the formal channels, although they are increasingly becoming connected, and there are also farmer collectives who do a terrific job. But I think agtech firms are doing a lot of work with farmer and farmer producer organizations. So banks could potentially collaborate with them to increase formalization and lending. So these are some of the recommendations from our report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions towards the end. But it is time for me to transition to Sandeep Bhattacharya, who's the India Projects Manager at Climate Bonds Initiative. 1 second, let me stop share. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion, Sandeep Bhattacharya. Sandeep is responsible for coordinating Climate Bonds Initiative efforts to drive development of India green finance market, as well as CBI stakeholder engagement in the country. He takes part in CBI's communication and media engagements in India. Sandeep has more than 15 years of experience related to bond markets in India and Southeast Asia, where his roles has varied from credit evaluation, business development, execution, and structuring of transactions. He has held management level positions in Deutsche Bank Group, Kakamas Barag, a subsidiary of Bank Negara, Malaysia, or the Malaysian Central Bank. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thanks a lot, Shiva. It is my privilege to be moderating this panel, and I will introduce my co-panelists. Hari Rajgopal, who heads Capital Markets and Strategic Initiative verticals at Samannati, and is responsible for developing access to different types of capital market instruments for funding resources. He has a long stint with Rabobank, which is the well-known Dutch food and agribusiness bank, in various capacities. And we also have with us Shalini Chabra, who's the managing partner India at 3i Partners. It's a Silicon Valley-based impact fund, and she's an experienced angel investor. So she's passionate about supporting the most impoverished sections of our society and creating an impact at scale, which she believes can be achieved through interventions in the agriculture, health, education, livelihood through the use of technology. So she has spent, in her career, she has spent long stints with HDFC Bank, Citibank, Kotak Mahindra Bank. And her banking sector spans lending to large corporate financial institutions, SME, structured finance, as well as credit policy implementation. We also have with us Patrick Duart, who has gained a lot of field experience in the 4 continents, and has worked 9 years in the investment bank, analyst at Balkans, Caucasus, East Asia, Africa, and then 4 years as the regional manager at Asian markets team at Symbiotics. So he's got very strong investment analysis skills and versatility when developing a large range of financial institutions and developing emerging economies. So I'll start with Hari. Samunnati is one of the case studies which we have featured in the report. So, Hari, my first question would be, can you give us a brief about how Samunnati looks at sustainable agriculture, and what are the plans, the challenges faced till now, and the main factors in the favor of going into sustainable agriculture?
Well, thank you, Sandeep. And Samunnati is a agri-value chain enabler. We work across value chains with a finance plus approach, which is finance plus market linkages. And for us, the way we have interpreted sustainable agriculture or climate smart agriculture is how can we tackle 3 objectives. One is how can we sustainably increase agricultural productivity and incomes? How can we adapt and build resilience among our customers to climate change? And how can we back agricultural activities that reduce or eliminate greenhouse gas emissions? And in this direction, we are working very much with our value chain approach, where we work to eliminate working capital constraints in agricultural value chains, multiply the market linkages. So the way we approach climate smart agriculture is not in a siloed fashion, and this is a project for us, but indeed by identifying the pillars around which we can pursue climate smart agriculture activities, such as how can we do soil nutrient improvement, how can we reduce the chemical utilization in agriculture, how can we make agriculture more water efficient, how can we reduce food waste in the supply chain in India, most of it before the first sale of produce has happened, and how can we reduce the carbon emissions of agriculture. So once you identify the 5 pillars of what climate smart agriculture is going to be, then we identify value chains, activities, and solutions that would constitute climate smart agriculture. Sandeep, you're on mute.
Sorry, I muted myself. So I believe one big support is the role of the Rabo Foundation and USAID guarantee in promoting sustainable agriculture. So what's been your experience on rolling out that, and I mean, if you can share some interesting tidbits about some eligible borrowings?
Certainly. So when the USAID Rabobank Foundation guarantee program was launched, this is India's first such climate finance initiative, and we and another financial institution were identified as partners. Now, given that this is in a very niche space where it is about supporting agroforestry activities as well as supporting what we call the sustainable landscape sector, which means activities that not only reduce the chemical consumption of agriculture or water efficiency, but also change the land use for something that is environment positive. Given that this was being rolled out for the first time, it has taken a bit of an effort for us to understand as a financial institution what we can do, teams to understand what can be done. And why we set up a climate smart agriculture business team dedicated to building such a portfolio, the excellence in terms of the knowledge required for building the same. And using that, we have in fact built a portfolio of about, we've utilized about 57% of our guarantee, which is a $5 million guarantee from USAID and Rabobank Foundation, and we use about 57% of it over the last 2.5 years. Now, while clearly this is certainly only a baby step in the right direction, it is certainly one of the first such forays for any commercial institution into climate finance. Now, in terms of the eligible activities, these would be, say, a combination of, for example, drip irrigation and system of rice intensification in paddy cultivation. This would be entities working in the non-timber forest produce value chains, which are forest produce harvested sustainably with the right amount of market linkages and working capital. These would be financing poly houses and help farmers cultivate vegetables in lower than the ambient temperatures, which means they're able to use lesser resources to grow the same quantum of produce. And using this, we have largely spread out to a large number of farmer cooperatives as well as MSMEs who are working in these eligible value chains. But of course, a long road awaits.
So the last question would be, if while there can be many policy wish lists, if you were to ask for only 3, what would they be?
Well, I would say in terms of a lot more needs to be done to mainstream measurement of climate impact, because that is something we are all trying to learn. So I think a more concerted push to say have a certain standard of assessment of climate impact, which would help us articulate our work and present our work to more stakeholders. I think secondly, more, I would say, low cost debt capital for chasing these long-term end users. And while, of course, Symbiotics, who's also on this panel, has made a huge contribution to this space and will speak about it. But I think more such players are required, because credit guarantees are a wonderful way to reduce the risk, but still there is an impediment in the cost of capital for those institutions that want to work in this space. And I think thirdly, if we could look at including activities addressing climate change and addressing climate resilience in agriculture to be part of priority sector lending and create specific subclassifications, that would be part of my 3 wishes.
Thanks a lot, Hari. So as you know, as our report recommends, so first we'll have to create possibly a taxonomy of what is climate resilient agriculture, and then create a subclass for policy incentivization. Thanks a lot. And now that you've spoken, we will speak to Symbiotics, who has invested in you and in perhaps, I think, yes, it is India's first green bond in agriculture. So, Patrick, can you briefly explain the operating model of Symbiotics, and you've invested in, how much you have invested in sustainable agriculture? I believe it's just not limited to India, it's even outside.
Sure, Sandeep, thanks for the question. So yes, we are a sustainable asset manager. So we're looking for sustainability, and we've been incorporated for 16 years. So we have currently around 300 financial institutions as partners, so mostly MFIs and banks in emerging and frontier markets. So we originate these transactions for 25 funds, and we have, that's the last figure I share, 2.6 billion assets under management dollar. So we have 350 partners, I said, but 20 in India. So how we access to sustainable agriculture? Well, I would say that around 20-25% of the FI we are supporting are leaders and have a dominant portfolio in agriculture. So that's what is very interesting to us, is when we are in this position, being an impact investors, to identify a performing FI, not only on the operational ground, but also on the social and environmental ground. We are quite excited to start and build up that relationship. And so that's what happened with Samunati back in 2018 when we started this relationship. So for us, that's the ideal world. And so I must say that we don't have an exclusive mandate on agriculture, but it's an added interest for most of our funds.
I see. So can you throw some light on, your Samunati investments and, especially the later green and maybe the earlier social bond which you have invested in? Sure.
So we started, we wanted initially to issue that green bond last year. And we realized it was quite a process. Also for us, we had to learn a lot. We needed an external consultant. We needed some additional policy, which were not being ready at the Samonati level. We were not ready either. So we would have delayed the process too long if we were going for that green bond at that time. But when we resumed that dialogue this year, it was a different story. Samonati have done a great job to hire experts. They adjust their MIS, they align standards to the international level with the green committee, green policy. So they reached some key milestones. And so for us, it was a quite straightforward process this year. And when we issued that green bond in July 2021. So I know that the main assets, eligible assets that we aim to support here are climate resilient crops, climate smart farm inputs, and I think there's some support to the sustainable agriculture practices. So what we really like is the fact that it was not only about lending here, it's a full service along the chain, and that is for us being impact investors key elements to consider. So we started really in 2018 with a normal loan. And today we have issued 3 bonds, the last one being a social bond, indeed, yes.
Okay, and you also invested in Sri Lanka's first green bond, again, I think linked to agriculture. What was can you throw some light on that one?
Sure, so yes, we provided a green bond. That was our very first one actually at symbiotic level. In 2019, so it was quite exciting. It's also the first in Sri Lanka. It's not huge. It's only 7.75 million, a 4-year loan, unsecured, and we hope it sets a precedent because Sri Lanka needs it. The proceeds were also used to finance sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and energy efficiency project. And unlike Samonati, so the bank is not focusing on agriculture, but have a 15% assets that fully dedicated to agriculture and especially sustainability agriculture. So that's something we wanted to help them to finance. So even though nearly half of their portfolio still comprise MSME loans, they compete with much larger banks, but they have chosen a different strategy. So they focus on the service rather than the interest rates, and they have a very clever approach to this. So it met perfectly the needs of our investors, being operationally completely sustainable and at the same time try to break through in terms of green finance. And so they got some awards with that bond, and we were happy to be part of that story.
Great. Hopefully you can continue investing in India and in many other parts of the world in promoting sustainable agriculture. So I would now move over to Shalini and talk a little bit about your organization, Shalini. So can you throw some light on 3i Partners and its investment patterns for starters?
Sure. So we are a Silicon Valley-based impact fund. Our primary focus areas are fourfold. We look at interventions that we can make through agriculture, health, education, and livelihood spaces. One of the core sort of philosophies or thumb rules or decision makers that we use is we want to see an element of innovation and technology. It could be truly disruptive technology. It could be disruption through creation of new methods of outreach. It could be new equipment. So you're not really operating stuff on the farm, but we really want to see change. Agriculture is in a very interesting space right now, especially in India, the way we see it, because we see a lot of ideas out there which are geared towards the small and marginal farmer. For example, small equipment mechanization, which can really be handled by a single individual or even a woman farmer, use of hydroponics, saving of water, use of shifting away from the use of standard fertilizers, especially the government-backed urea, to organic fertilizers so as far as possible. So a lot of these technologies are really creating a change in how the agri space is evolving. And the small and marginal farmer, as compared to the rest of the world, is really, really small. He's a landholder of about 2.5 to 5 acres, depending on what definition you use and whether you're talking of the small or the marginal farmer. As compared to this, the US definition of a small farmer is 100 acres. So we're really excited about the possibility of tech disruption in this space, especially in the agricultural space, creating both change in terms of income and livelihood at the bottom of the grid, and of course, creation of large profitable businesses. Sandeep, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So that's very exciting times for Indian agriculture, and so heartening to see that the marginalized small-scale farmer has something to look up to. So I believe you're close to possibly some investments, and maybe you have invested in some of these technology providers. Would you be comfortable sharing a few, something which you think has impressed you?
Sure. So I am in a position to share one investment we are just closing. It's all signed, sealed, and not yet delivered. So we're in that space. But it's a company called Hydroponics. They have a really nice, sweet piece of technology where, as we're all aware, India, outside of the monsoon season, really uses a lot of water dug up from the underground aquifers by using bore wells. We have about 4.5 crore bore wells, and about 1 crore of them have run dry because the aquifers have run out of water. And the way to really, get water again into these aquifers does not exist. The only alternative is to really go deeper. There is an existing technology to, have these aquifers refreshed, which really relies on creation through rainwater of a natural water pot. This company has actually come up with a technology where they make perforations deep into the ground, into the casing, so that during the rainy season, the water from the monsoon rainfall that year can really go deep underground and stay there. They use the natural filtration of the soil, which means that they use the water actually runs through soil for 15 to 20 feet before it moves underground. This technology, as compared to alternatives, it costs about 10%, really applicable for the small farmer and truly innovative. So, and of course, Wilgrow has been one of the partners in this one. So it's fairly interesting. It allows a recharge of water. Scientific studies have been done and proven that they extend water availability between 4 to 6 months, which means that in Maharashtra, in an arid area, which is mountainous, if water would run out by September, the farmer has water availability up to December or January. It actually enables one entire crop cycle in addition.
I see. That must be quite some revenue creation with the farmer. And so the revenue model of this company is a one-time sales, or is the service related as well?
So as of now, they're looking at one-time sales. This is a company which is known as Urban Environment Technologies. They are actually working on some additional ideas where they are looking at mapping of the underground aquifers through using AI and ML, where they will look at a SaaS model. But that's a little bit into the future. The current is a machine sale. So it's a one time.
Artificial intelligence, sorry, what's ML?
Yes, machine learning.
I see, machine learning. Sorry, not too aware of those jargons. So yeah, that was quite wonderful to hear. And you know, talking of scaling up, and you know, while there's so much of appreciation for institutions like Samunati taking the lead out here, you've also been, you know, for long into the mainstream banking system. What do you think? How they can possibly play a role in, you know, these kind of what might be seen as, you know, a little bit funky technologies, or you know, these kind of sustainable agriculture practices?
So I think banks run this little difficult position where though they need to grow their agricultural portfolios, I mean, there are Reserve Bank requirements, right? The agri portfolio, or as part of net bank credit, needs to be about 18%. Out of that, small and marginal farmer, if I recall correctly, is about 8%. So there is a focus towards providing credit and financing to the small and marginal farmer. But the way and the delivery of that credit takes place is really through proving that there is either a land holding or it happens through microfinance and interventions through self-help groups. Something like this, innovation like this, actually does not get banking support at all. It requires really changing something in the existing boreware. It's not a piece of equipment, it's a service. Even though it costs just about 15,000 rupees, the small farmer, especially the tenanted farmer, let's take the tenanted farmer, he doesn't really have even 15,000 rupees. How does he fund this? It's difficult for him. And that's a place where our banks really haven't reached. And that intervention needs to take place. That evolution needs to take place. The NBFCs, like Samunati especially, have been far more agile than the banks, but I don't think they're still there in terms of, you know, funding a service.
Yeah. So Hari, would you want to?
I can see he's nodding.
Let him respond.
No, certainly, and in fact, it is funding services which are not tangible. I think there's a whole I would say discussion that needs to be done. How can we back the solution while creating a solution that is acceptable from a financing perspective? But I'm sure only by getting into such discussions can we find solutions. So just staying away and saying, hey, this doesn't smell good, isn't going to be a part of the solution. We'd still be a part of the problem.
So then, I mean, besides, you know, what we discussed about the Rabo Bank, the Rabo Foundation USAID guarantee, besides products like this, what can accelerate, you know, the uptake? And Shalini, you can add in as well. What do you think could? There's an existing ecosystem which supports startups of all kinds, and I mean, India is one of the most dynamic ecosystems to support startups. And now, given that exists, what else can possibly do something in agriculture then? Or this kind of maybe a service financing? What will make you a little bit more comfortable?
Hari, that's you, right?
Yeah, that's for Hari. And
Okay.
then Shalini, you can also add.
Sure. So I think the key is not that capital is not available or it is simply too risky to do it because there are enough mitigation measures into the pools of capital that exist. I think the first is how do you do matchmaking between solutions that are available and the problems that exist? And often these two exist in two silos, that there are people with a solution who don't know where to deploy it. And there are people with problems who don't know how to solve it. And therefore, key is how do you bring this together and how do you deploy innovations at scale? And I think that's where market agencies, market forces have to come together. And as a small initiative in that direction, we have launched something called Some Aram, which is a solution deployment, mentoring, incubation platform, where we simply say that given that we work with over 1,500 farmer collectives and 1,500 agri enterprises, this could be the petri dish that is needed for the deployment of solutions. It is not about providing working capital. It is not about providing any kind of service, but simply providing the sample size to deploy a solution. Unless we see, hey, this solution solves this problem to this extent, you cannot deploy it at scale or make a business case out of it. So I think more such initiatives are required, that here we say maybe innovation is not something which is very complex. It is something as simple but as critical as the solution Shalini ji mentioned, which is about how do I extend the life of my borewell by helping a better recharge. And indeed, it is in identifying such solutions and identifying the companies with such solutions and then backing them to connect them to customers and then provide them with the right market linkage and working capital solutions. I think that's something which is a must. This requires time, energy, bandwidth, resources, and the commercial sector can't do it just by itself because there is an unknown success rate. And that's why, non-commercial sources of capital are also required to partner the private sector in scaling up such initiatives. I think that's what I would like to say. How can we take more such innovation to scale?
I see. Shalini, you have anything to add to what Hari is saying?
I don't disagree. I think it's difficult to move forward with these solutions. They are, for a bank, fairly unknown and unreliable. The ways to measure and track risk, especially in some of these spaces, are extremely difficult, tough. India does not really have enough data, but I see a trend. I see a trend where we're moving forward, where land records are being, there is already, we all know that there is already Aadhaar and, the UPI and the whole India stack, which is deployed, which has made just Aadhaar enabled payment services, which has just changed how you can reach out, at least in terms of cash, to the rural population. But there is the digitization of land records and the innovation that will create, which will enable lending to some of these, including what's happening on the account aggregator platforms. So it enables sharing of data. So as we move forward with a few of these, and then what I'm seeing alternatively in terms of, credit scoring solutions really developed for spaces where there's no credit history, like gaming solutions, which are becoming increasingly, which are improving a lot. They're still not deployed at scale, but they are really in large scale pilots now. They will enable delivery of credit, and once they enable delivery of credit, some of these solutions will find deployment at scale. But the key problem will remain, how do you establish the interactions and the platforms for access? Okay. So he's absolutely right. I agree with him that the platforms are really key.
So thanks a lot. So there's an audience question from Meera, which I think Patrick has also answered, but for the benefit of those who might be a bit technically challenged like me and possibly can't read it. So the question is the priority among sectors, say energy, infra, manufacturing, etc. Where is agriculture for investors and what are the risks they see? Patrick, you might just want to verbalize what we've written, because I'm sure some people will have technical challenges and it will be enriching to hear you. Patrick?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go more in details about the risk, or?
You just, I'm not sure everybody's seen the question and an answer.
Okay, sure.
You just need to verbalize or just explain a little bit on what.
All right. So in terms of, as I said, for us, agriculture was not a focus. We're quite opportunistic in terms of sectors. What we like is when we reach this sustainable agriculture. That's a different game. And one constraint that we've seen, for instance, was the long-term nature of the most agriculture project, and for that, these 10 to 15 years tenures, that's something, a product we don't have. So that's either it's too risky or the investors are not willing to commit for that long period of time. Now, what we like, as I said, we like sustainable agriculture for the social dimension and the environmental objectives that it reaches. And so that's something we are definitely interested. Now, the second filter is about being in the agriculture, sustainable agriculture, and being performant. And so we know that it has been quite difficult for some companies to perform. And so we need the support of local financial institutions which are vetting these projects. And so once they do that, we are in good company to finance, but we don't do project finance. We will finance the full balance sheet of a institution, a financial institution. I don't know if that's an issue, if that's clear enough. Are you on mute, Sandeep?
There's another question. How do you get funding for hydroponics project which has high availability and is scalable too? So I think, Hari, would you offer some answer here? Does Samannati provide, or do you know?
Well, see, we haven't seen too many hydroponics projects at scale that require much working capital, but we have a specific team that examines all such funding requests by startups. So I encourage other entities to log into our platform, Samaram. There's a web link which I can also share. And then there's a dedicated team which is there for answering such questions.
Okay. With that, I would like to thank everybody here for being a part of this panel. It was a privilege to share the understanding of so many people here. This is some of the housekeeping points. You can the question and answer. I believe we have had a session. The report will be. It has already been shared, I think, on the chat box, and your feedback is valuable for us. Please take the survey, which will appear. I think which has already appeared on the screen. Please take the survey, and with that, I would like to thank everybody all over again for being a part of this journey. And happy reading of the report for those who are interested.
Thanks, Sandeep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sandeep and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.